What's going on, Packers fans? Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. I'm not going to lie. I'm pretty excited about this one today because we're being joined by Paul Farrington. I have been on Paul's show before. He has been on the radio show before, but have not had the opportunity to have him on the podcast yet. They always say, keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. And we have to be able to keep some Minnesota Vikings fans in our midst to just kind of have a feel for what's going on. But Paul, I'm really excited to be chatting with you today, going over not only the Packers, the Vikings, but the NFC North in totality as well. But before we get there, thanks so much for joining. And how are you doing?
Doing great. You know, as they say when they call in on radio, long-time listener, first-time caller here. It's funny, Andy. I don't listen to too many podcasts, actually, because I work in podcasts. It's always part of my life. But yours makes it into the rotation. Like, I have a very, very tiny rotation, and this one is consistently in there. I'll be in the gym walking around. I got Andy Herman in my headphones. It's like, I got to make one of those memes where people, I'm doing my lift, and so they don't know that Andy Herman and Pack a Day is what I'm listening to. So it's pretty exciting for me, too, even though I'm a Vikings fan, try and get them from the inside.
Well, I appreciate that a ton. Before we go any further, I do want to let people know you can, of course, find him on the Paul Farrington Show on YouTube, obviously where you get your favorite podcasts as well. And you can find him on social media at Farrington Show. I'll let you sort of define your journey before I try to butcher it and do a terrible job of it. You're obviously a Vikings fan, started with a Vikings show, but you also have a very unique Packers following as well, which has led to this sort of bizarro dynamic. Like I said, I'm not butcher it, so I'll let you kind of take it from there.
It is a really weird, I always say like it's twisted. It's kind of a sick following that we have where, I used to do the show in college with my friend Ziggy, who co-hosts it now. And now I do it with Jack and Zach, my other two friends. And after college, we decided to keep it going in podcast form. And we did it for 2021, 2022. But then during the Jordan Love breakout campaign in 2023, we just kind of having natural reactions of like, this can't be happening again. There's no way. There's no way that they're doing the Favre to Rodgers, Rodgers to Love. Like, you got to be kidding me. We call the Packers a blue sky franchise. And as the Packers, as that Love run became more and more successful, people just started to enjoy watching us become more miserable and more miserable. And that's where that bad, that sick dynamic, as I say, began to form, where we actually found a really healthy relationship with Packers fans who just enjoyed our misery. And we were like, wait a second, we could actually like make our show something out of this. So we're still an NFL show, we like to say, but we do have by far our biggest audience are Packer fans. And it makes for a very strange Sunday where I'm watching Green Bay on the television and I'm always rooting against them. And I think that's the most important thing, is as long as that truthfulness stays with our show, it's the most important thing. And when the Vikings play them, 100%, not a single piece of me wants the Packers to win that game. But then, like, they'll be playing the Texans or something. In the back of my mind, I go, yeah, like, I know that our show is going to have great numbers if they win this game. Like, Jordan Love is the ball late. I know that it's going to pop off if they score here. And it's like that Green Goblin devil mask in the back of my head going, oh, do you want him? I'm like, no, got to push it down. And that keeps it genuine. So it's a weird dynamic, but it's a fun one. And I've really gotten to enjoy the moments with the Packers fans. It's a great fan base. That's another frustrating thing about you guys.
Well, I apologize for that. We try our best. If it helps, there are a couple bad eggs in there every once in a while that you can find as well. But no, it is a very amazing fan base. And I love the dynamic that you have. It makes your show really, really fun, and it makes it unique and just different. And there is that sort of, how do I want to define it? Just like the different mindset between, again, wanting obviously the Packers to lose, but having some of that sort of affection. So it's just a very unique thing. And I certainly enjoy it quite a bit. And I think people are going to get a taste of that today. And I think a great way to kind of start there is you had the opportunity to attend the draft in Green Bay this year. Obviously, got to see a lot of these Packers fans up close, got to cover a draft in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I know we talked about it on the radio show a little bit, but just kind of walk people through your experience in Green Bay and covering the draft.
It was amazing. Caleb Williams, I saw after throwing some shade at Packers fans before, he said, growing up, he rooted for Aaron Rodgers. And when he went to Lambeau, he thought it was amazing. And a la Caleb, I kind of had the same experience for just walking around the stadium. There's a piece of me is like, screw this place. Like, how many bad moments that the Vikings had there? But then you have to respect the traditions and the history of Lambeau Field and the Green Bay area. As someone who went to school in the Midwest, I'm comfortable in that area, but I've never been that far up into Wisconsin before. So it was just awesome. The people were so nice to us the entire trip. We had listeners who would come up to us and say, like, love the show, man, love what you're doing. And not a single person was mean. Like, I had my Viking jersey on the entire weekend. I did not get one, like, truthfully mean comment. It was a couple jabs here or there, but it was always like, oh man, you want to come have a brat? And I was like, sure. Like, okay, yeah. Like, let me buy you a beer. They're just people coming up and they're like, yeah, you guys suck. And they're like, oh, you know what? Let's get a beer. It's like, okay, like this is awesome.
I love that.
It was great. And we got to do a bunch of the behind the scenes stuff at the draft, go up on the stage into the green room. We made it onto Lambeau Field and had a great video of Ziggy having this like existential moment where he's like, maybe I'm a Packer fan. And it was just great. We had a lot of fun.
I'm glad you got that experience. It's obviously an amazing place, and it was absolutely epic during the draft. I know you had one of those moments that I think we've all had as fans where, as a Viking fan, you maybe weren't super excited about your first round draft pick, Donovan Jackson, to begin with, and then have that moment where you sort of immediately start talking yourself into said draft pick. We have all been there. But I think you probably have come around in some way to Donovan Jackson, and enjoying that first round pick. And obviously he's going to help the Vikings offensive line. But now that we've let some time pass and it's been a couple months since that draft pick has taken place, where are you now with the Vikings taking Donovan Jackson in the first round?
Oh, Andy, I felt so bad the next day because this was the first time where we're actually having some success on Twitter as well with our videos. And, most of the stuff we were putting out, we're getting a lot of eyes on them. And, I doubt Donovan Jackson seeing our stuff, but still, you never know who's seeing this. And I felt horrible because I just wanted Will Howard. I just wanted to get a cornerback. I think that's a concern with the Vikings that hasn't been talked about enough, even though it's definitely is an issue. So while we're going live, I didn't see all the stuff coming out on Will Howard or Will Johnson.
Yep.
Yeah, no, not the quarterback.
I wish you guys would have taken Will Howard in the first round. That would have been great content.
That would have been a crazy reaction. But I'm sitting there talking about Will Johnson not seeing all the stuff coming out on his knee, and when he falls to the Vikings, because I was worried the Packers were actually going to take him. I was like, we did it. Like, I cannot believe this happened. I talked to Joel Klatt the day before, and he said, there's no way he makes it to you guys. It was just like, all right, the guy fell. And I felt horrible about my reaction. That was just complete despair. But the more, no one can gaslight themselves like me into believing in the Vikings and their picks. So within 10 minutes, I think I was like, you know what? We really do need an offensive line help. And I've been very vocal about it on our show for years, especially the interior. And I thought it was very hypocritical of me to sit there on my podcast and say, you guys got to fix the O-line. And the moment they do it, I throw a fit. So I've come around on it. And, the best teams in the league, and especially in the NFC, have great offensive lines. And that's something that, the Packers have invested a lot there as well. It's something that we're seeing the great teams always have that. So I've come around completely. Apologies to Donovan Jackson. I'm very excited that you're a Viking.
We've all been there. We've all had that moment. For me, it was Rashawn Gary. And I think my logic at the time was fairly sound. When the Green Bay does not pick top 12 very often. And when you do,
I know.
my thought at the time was like, when you're picking that early, I want somebody who not only has like the high end athleticism, but also that has the productivity and doesn't have injury issues. Like at that point in the draft, you should be able to have your cake and eat it too. Just get a little bit of everything. And Gary not having the productivity in college and also having a shoulder injury at the time where there was concern as to whether or not he was going to be able to like come in healthy or if he was going to need surgery. There's just these question marks surrounding him. I'm like, at pick 12, there's a lot of question marks for somebody when that's a normal like pick 25 thing for Green Bay. Of like, you get that guy pick 25, you're like, yep, he's got everything that you need, but there's a couple question marks. We'll work through that. At pick 12, I'm like, there are guys out there like a Montez Sweat or some of these other guys, Brian Burns, that don't have those question marks. You can take it, but I was so upset. I was, pissed off when they took him, and there was these other options out there. And then, of course, I go back and we watch these first round prospects ahead of time, and we see a few of the games here or there. I did a deeper dive after, and I'm like, oh, okay, I can totally see why they selected this guy with pick 12. And I've been there as well. I think we've all been there in some real way, shape, or form. But I felt for you in that moment, and I know exactly how that feels.
If I don't mean to derail the conversation here at all, but there were 2 times, if you don't mind me sharing with you, I think you'll enjoy this. Particularly that I remember Christian Ponder back in, was it 2011? I remember, you know the draft books? I think Athlon has one.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
My dad and I called it the Bible. We called it the draft Bible.
Love it.
And growing up, like trips down to Florida for spring break, we would read that together, and like it was awesome. I remember when they took Christian Ponder. I think he was like the 9th quarterback on in the draft book. Rounds 2 to 3 was the projection, and we're sitting there at pick 12, and the name Christian Ponder's read. I think I'm in 7th grade or 6th grade. I can't remember. And I just lost it. I was like, what the hell? I don't even think I was cursing at the time, and I was probably throwing around some curse words. I'm not a big cursor, but I'm pretty sure some swear words are thrown around that night. And I just went on a tirade. Like, what are we doing? This guy's not even in the book. And my dad, I'll never forget my dad's quote. He just stood up from the chair eventually and said, well, you've ruined the draft. And went to sleep. Like pick 14, he went to sleep. I did feel validated with the Ponder reaction.
That one came to fruition. Yep, that was not bad in hindsight.
It was a bad reaction. The other one, which actually also played out, I mean, not well, but played out according to my reaction, was 2022. I am the producer of Inside the Garage, Kyle Hamilton's podcast at Notre Dame. So, Kyle and I aren't best friends, but I know Kyle, and I'm friends with his teammates. So I'm sitting there at pick 14, I think it is, or wherever it is when we're on the clock, and Hamilton's sitting there. Supposed to go number 2, supposed to go top 5. Like, holy crap, we got Kyle. Like, I am going to know a Viking. And I also thought that he was great, and obviously it turned out to be.
And you've had some success with Notre Dame safeties.
We've had
as well.
Exactly. I can't tell you how excited I am, because I thought this guy, I said on our show, I think he'll be a top 5 safety by year 2. And when that trade came in with the Lions and they took Jameson Williams, only for us to then turn around and take Lewis Seen at the end of the first round, another safety, that might be the angriest I've actually ever been. And I bring that up all the time. Ziggy, whenever he mentions the Ravens, I'm like, oh, Kwesi and Hamilton, we have to move on or else I throw a fit. But yeah, that happens during the draft. And sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. I hope I'm wrong with Donovan Jackson. And to make your question a long answer there.
No,
yeah, I like the pick.
it's fantastic. I love that. And again, I think we've all had those stories. And I think that's partially the beauty of the draft. I mean, if you don't have your guys that you're rooting for, that you want to get, and guys that maybe you want to avoid, I kind of feel like you're doing the draft wrong. I think you have to be able to turn the page after and be like, all right, these are the Packers, or these are the Vikings now, or whatever it is. And like, we're going to move forward, and you hope for the best immediately. I think if you carry that into it and be like, oh, I just hate this guy forever now, or screw this guy or whatever, that's the wrong attitude. But the whole part of the draft that's so fun is wanting certain players for your team and then being excited if they got them, or being a little bit disappointed if you didn't. And that just is what kind of makes it fun all together. So I think in a way you're doing it right. Even if, again, some of those things in hindsight, you maybe wish you would handle differently. Again, I've been there as well. It's still kind of, I feel like, the right way to do it. I wanted Andre Dillard instead of Rashawn Gary, and that certainly would not have aged very well at all at that point. So, although I did really like Brian Burns as well. I digress. You mentioned Christian Ponder. That was an unsuccessful first-round pick for the Minnesota Vikings. There's another first-round pick for the Minnesota Vikings at quarterback that is getting ready to be the guy in Minnesota. I want to talk about that because I think it's one of the real interesting storylines, not only in the NFC North, not just for the Minnesota Vikings, but in the NFL in totality. Is you have this very good Minnesota Vikings team that was pretty darn fantastic a season ago, up until the NFC North completely crumbled in the playoffs in its entirety. But up until that point, the Vikings were playing great. They decided to move on from Sam Darnold, who did have a disappointing end of the season. And they go, I guess I shouldn't say that. They wanted to keep him, but he decided also to go elsewhere and go play for Seattle. And they decided that JJ McCarthy's their quarterback. How are you feeling as we sit here today about JJ McCarthy, the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings?
I'd be lying if I said I'm not uneasy. to a degree. Like that's the honest truth. I've come out a few times and we've done segments where we've talked up JJ and said how excited we are. But the truth of the matter is, if I'm going to be as honest as I can, I really have no idea. Like that's the huge question mark around. And you're going to see reports coming out that he's dominating at OTAs or he's going to have a great training camp, and we just don't know. And the crazy thing about JJ McCarthy too is this isn't a guy. I mean, he won at Michigan, but he wasn't a guy that lit up the stat sheet, right? This was someone who they had a great rushing attack, and they had a really good offensive line, and JJ did his part, and he was very effective there. That's why he was a first-round quarterback. But we just don't really know a lot about him, and he's coming off this injury.
Yep.
So the most confident piece for me is what you said. It's the roster around him. It's Kevin O'Connell, who's become this quarterback guru in a sense, to having Josh Dobbs have some of the best games of his career, and Kirk Cousins played his best football with Kevin O'Connell. So I trust the Vikings coaching staff. I trust the roster around them. They built up the offensive line like we just talked about. It is the perfect situation for a quarterback. And Justin Jefferson is just like, I can go on, but the more you break down Jefferson, he really is the ultimate like Robin for a quarterback's Batman. He's unbelievable. Sure. So everything's there for JJ McCarthy to succeed. But I'd be lying if I said I'm not worried, because as we know, you could have a great team, and if your quarterback doesn't have it, your team's not going anywhere. So we actually just did an episode where we said the truth about McCarthy is, if he's not really good, not just like people want him to be good, and they're saying, could the Vikings win double-digit games again, win the division? If he's good, there's a ceiling on this team, because Sam Darnold was really good last year. The only way this Vikings team gets further is if McCarthy has a really, really good year. And that feels like it's an unfair expectation for someone that we don't know anything about him. His first year starting.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I'm bullish on JJ McCarthy. Sincerely, I really liked him coming out. I thought he was a really smart pick at the time. Let me ask you this, because I think this is interesting. It feels like there's always been a little bit of hesitation or trepidation, even from the powers that be in Minnesota, when talking about JJ McCarthy. And again, maybe that's just not wanting to anoint him or put too much pressure on him or put too unfair of expectations on him. I don't know how real the Aaron Rodgers flirtations were with Minnesota. We know that they probably wanted Daniel Jones back. We know that they probably wanted Sam Darnold back. I don't know if that would have been as a competition or if that would have been as like a 1 year, again, stopgap up until JJ McCarthy gets maybe a little bit more ready and has a little bit more opportunity to prepare. How do you view all of that this offseason with maybe these flirtations with other quarterbacks, and maybe not just because if they would have come at the beginning and said, we don't have any interest in Darnold, we don't have any interest in Daniel Jones unless it's just as a pure backup, we don't have any interest in Aaron Rodgers, we don't have any interest in any of this because JJ McCarthy is our guy and we're unequivocally moving forward, like, okay, they obviously have a huge confidence. It's just, for me, outside looking in, you'll know better, but it hasn't felt like they've had that undeniable confidence in him moving forward, even if they're moving forward with him at the same time.
I understand where that's coming from, but I think it was just due process. Like, you have to look at Darnold again after the year he had. It wouldn't be, I don't think that that's properly running your football team. And Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah talked about this. He said, part of my job is to evaluate every single guy we can bring in here and the best way to make this team a Super Bowl contender. And I think that they actually did a really good job of doing that without necessarily being disrespectful to JJ or without showing a lack of faith in JJ. Because the Rodgers stuff, while it existed, a lot of that was being provoked just by the media. It was saying, oh, Rodgers wants to go to the Vikings. And I think that made a lot of sense. That was, again, it's the best fit for a quarterback. So, of course, Aaron was probably waiting there. Sure. I was excited at the thought of it because I think Aaron might have another great year in him, but he needs to be in the right environment. I don't really think that's Pittsburgh. I think it could be Minnesota. So I thought that they were right to explore all the options. But ultimately, I thought they made a pretty strong commitment to JJ by not actually signing one of them. Fair. And that, Sam Darnold's contract was $33 million a year, and Rodgers and Daniel Jones, like these were not completely breaking the bank deals. Where if they didn't have faith in JJ, you'd probably see Daniel Jones in Minnesota. If Daniel Jones thought he could start, and if the Vikings wanted him, he would probably be with the Vikings. So I thought that even though they sort of flirted with quarterbacks, I thought they made a pretty strong commitment to JJ because most of those stories died down by April, right? it was really just the free agency period where we were talking about it. And from then on, it was just talking about Rodgers waiting out for the Vikings, not the Vikings actually seeking Rodgers.
No, I think that's well said, and I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think you're right in the fact that all three of those quarterbacks were very attainable if they wanted to go in that direction, and they very clearly did not, and very clearly went with JJ McCarthy. So no, I think that's probably an angle that I hadn't looked at it as, and I am very intrigued. I do think it is one of the best situations to be in football. If you're going to be a first time starter and coming off a knee injury, having that running game, and again, I think Jordan Mason's an interesting pickup there as well. Those wide receivers, that tight end, that offensive line that they've continued to improve with that head coach and that quarterback's coach, like they've got all the pieces there. And I do think he can succeed at a high level there. I don't necessarily hope that that's the case, but I do think that he absolutely can. I'm really interested to see what he can do as the starter for Minnesota this year. If there is any uptick from Darnold, if it's the same, if it's a little bit worse, all of those are very intriguing. And I think just in totality, what becomes of him is really just it's a really big kind of fork in the road for Minnesota, because if they hit on him and he's fantastic, like that's going to make them a really good team, I think, for the foreseeable future. And if they miss and he's just not the guy, well, then you're going to have to sort of reboot that at some point and figure out a new quarterback. And that could really set things back a little bit in Minnesota.
You know, we also had this decision a year ago with Kirk. You know, Kirk was coming off the injury, and that was something that made it a little bit easier. But we just had a decision where we were looking at a guy who was playing some of his best football before his injury, and we decided to go with Darnold. And that was definitely a decision where if Sam struggled, which was on the table, you know, it was not a sure thing that he was going to play the way he did. And if Kirk went to Atlanta, and remember the start they had, they beat Philly in Philly. They had the crazy Thursday night game. Like that season tailed off pretty quick, but Kirk Cousins got off to a decent start with the Falcons. There's a world where we're talking about, oh, what a mistake they made not bringing back Kirk with the roster they have. So, you know, it could go either way. It really can. And I'm happy that they just made the decision and stuck with it without too much wavering. But Sam was really good last year. I mean, there were a lot of games that he flat out won. He had bad moments. Jacksonville was a really bad game. Of course, everyone remembers the final two. But there were multiple games where he had the ball late and time after time got down the field and did what he had to, whether it was a field goal, whether it was a touchdown, whether it was just running out the clock. That's hard to ask for a first-year starter coming off an injury. Like that's where the expectations for JJ McCarthy, I think, are really bizarre and a little unique in that he's just being handed the keys to this really nice car. And they're like, all right, like go nuts with it. And hopefully you can get to our destination. But there are probably going to be some bumps along the way. There'll probably be some scratches. Like it's a weird position to be in for a first-year starter to have such a great roster around him and such high expectations. But also in the back of your mind, you're like, all right, let's, you know, not to continue with the car analogies, but let's pump on the brakes a little bit.
No, I think it's one of the more unique, again, storylines in the NFL is what he can do with that team. And really the NFC North quarterbacks in totality. We know what Jared Goff is at this point, but losing Frank Ragnow and, of course, Zeitler along that offensive line, this is a quarterback that you pressure him on the interior and he breaks down pretty quick. It's a totally different quarterback. And, of course, now Ben Johnson gone from that offense as well. I'm very interested in that aspect of it. Obviously, Jordan in Green Bay. Is there an upside there that, again, we haven't even seen yet because of all the injuries this past year? Does he settle in and really become, again, the player that we saw end of 2023 or maybe even better? Caleb Williams, the first overall pick in the draft last year. I mean, the range of outcomes for him of being one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, again, he was sort of destined to be, or again, the same guy we saw last year who just took way too long to throw the ball, never looked comfortable. But again, getting Ben Johnson and a better offensive line there, that should help him a ton. And then we just talked about McCarthy, the wild range of outcomes for the NFC North quarterbacks and how that changes the NFC North, not just for this year, but for the foreseeable future is really crazy to think about.
It's such a fun division to be a part of for next season. It's, as you said, there are just so many different outcomes that can happen. And I think we're all kind of secretly hoping that these Lions coordinators leaving have a much bigger impact than some people are saying, and probably than what will actually happen. But yeah, like Jared Goff has these moments where you just go, all right, like we should be able to expose something here. Yep. But then he has moments like last year where there were times where he just felt, you know, inevitable. He was unstoppable. Every time he dropped back, didn't he have some sort of record, or he closed in on a record of completed passes in a row in a couple
something to that extent? Yeah,
I remember something, and it was just like how do you stop these guys when they have Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery and Jared Goff is playing like this? So I'm hoping that the Lions take a step back. But at the same time, you have to look at the defense and go, they're getting a lot of dudes back too. They didn't do much in free agency, but they're getting a lot of guys back, headlined by Hutchinson. And the Lions scare me. They scare me again.
You did a podcast recently, basically kind of talking about who the biggest threat to the Lions is and whether or not it's the Packers or the Vikings. And maybe the Bears can get in that conversation as well. But just kind of tell everyone where you kind of came out on that conversation of who is the bigger threat to Detroit this upcoming season.
Well, Ziggy, my co-host, said the Vikings, and so did our friend Tom, who's a big Lions fan. He also picked the Vikings because of that sort of unknown ceiling with JJ, which is, that's a nice way to put it.
Sure.
I said I think it would be kind of crazy to pick anyone other than Green Bay right now. The argument against Jordan Love, and I thought, again, my friend Tom, who's the Lions fan, was saying a lot of us are sort of talking about Jordan Love as if his natural form is that 2023 end of season, as opposed to that being the peak. And his natural form is, a little, maybe not necessarily a bad quarterback, but, just closer to what we saw last season. And I think the injury was just such a huge part of it. It's kind of unfair to look at it that way. But maybe we are overrating Jordan Love because he got red hot. That's possible. The way I view it personally is it's probably more likely that Jordan Love is going to have a really, really good season than JJ McCarthy. And if Jordan Love, that's just a fact, I think.
Yep.
And if Jordan Love is really good, we've seen this Packer team beat the Lions. We saw him go into Detroit last year and nearly pull off that upset win. When Love's clicking, Green Bay they're tough to beat. I mean, they should have gone to the championship game in 2023 when they went to San Francisco. Like that should have been a Packer win. That was one where it was interesting in terms of rooting interest, by the way. That was like the peak of our show breaking out. And that's one where I was like, all right, maybe they actually need to win this game.
One more week at least, right? They get to the NFC Championship game and maybe it's different, but no, I totally know what you mean.
But I think, to answer the question, I think it has to be Green Bay because of the quarterback. I do, however, think that the Vikings roster is a little bit better than the Packers. All these NFC North teams have pretty complete teams when you go top to bottom, which is also amazing to look at. But just given the importance of quarterback and given what we've seen, that we've actually seen Jordan Love hit these highs, to me, that's why I said the Packers, even though I'd love to say the Vikings. And the Bears should get some attention. They really should.
Yeah, and that's flowing perfectly into my next question is, there's not a ton that a Vikings fan and a Packers fan can agree upon, but we agree that we don't like the Chicago Bears. But how worried should we be collectively as Vikings and Packers fans about Chicago? Is this a team that is at least just like kind of annoyingly on the radar right now, where you're just like, we're monitoring the situation. We're not nervous or worried yet, but we have an eye on it? Or is there like a legitimate of like, damn it, this team might actually be good?
I think right now I'm in and I think I'm wrong for this. I'm of the, it's kind of annoying. Like they might be good, but when you actually take a breath and go, let me look at this team, it's like, it's all there. It really is all there. And I think I'm going to continue to pretend that it's just like a little nuisance. Maybe they win 8 or 9 games and are a threat late in the year.
It bears it up more often than not. So that's probably still the right feeling to have. Like they'll find a way to Chicago Bears it.
Yes, exactly. That's the path I'm choosing. But I will say every time I just run through the roster in my head and I go, wow, what did Caleb struggle with? You said sacks last year, holding onto the football too long. Well, they're bringing in a guy who's known for getting the ball out quick. That's helped Jared Goff change his career, right? The fast passing attack that they have in Detroit. The offensive line has been an issue for so long. Well, this year they actually fixed it. We've talked about it forever about Chicago, but this year they did it and they upgraded in big ways. Joe Tooney's the real deal. So I just look at what they've done, even along the draft, right? Colston Loveland and Luther Bird, and they have DJ Moore. Like, this is a really good offense. It should be really good on paper. And the defense, they have a good defense as well. That's they always do in Chicago. The only thing preventing them from being really good is if they do Chicago Bears the whole thing up, because they should be a very good football team. I like Caleb Williams. I think he's got all the talent in the world. And you've seen Ben Johnson this offseason legitimately pull it back to like the fundamentals of football with Caleb. He's like, we're going to teach you how to snap the ball, like how to catch a snap, essentially. So I think it might take a little time to get going. And that's why I'm not really too worried about them as a threat for this year. But I think by the end of the year, and I think Green Bay plays them twice, right, in December.
Yeah, two
Like,
times in 3 weeks.
yeah, like the Bears should be very good, or not very good, but the Bears should be a legitimate opponent at that point in the year. Someone who
Great.
maybe can be a wild card team. So I do think they are like, I'm going to pivot. I think they are on my radar. They're definitely on my radar.
I think if you told me any of the 4 NFC North teams made the playoffs, would not be stunned in any capacity. Obviously, we know Detroit, and I think Green Bay, Minnesota, certainly in that conversation. If you told me Chicago got in that conversation too, I would not be stunned. It's a, like you said earlier, it's a very fun division. It's a fun division to be a part of, to see go against each other each week. Like, normally I'm not a huge fan of like, oh, Vikings and Bears are on. I'm like, I want both teams to lose anyway, so I don't really care as much. But those games this year, anything that's interdivision, I think are going to be must watch, because I have no idea how this thing's going to end up. In a random like Vikings Bears game at any point, or a Bears Lions game, like, could go a really long way in defining what this division looks like. So I think these are going to be must watch games, and I can't wait for any of them.
Week 1, right? You guys get the Lions and we have the Bears on Monday Night Football.
There you go.
What a way for the NFC North to start. And do you think the Bears, I was just thinking about this right now, could they have the highest ceiling of any of the North teams? And I know that I know on the surface level that's a no shot, but if they pulled it all together, man, Caleb and Ben Johnson could be scary.
In 2025, I think the answer is no. If you told me like which team has the highest ceiling for like maybe 2, 3, 4 years from now, I think Chicago could at least be in the conversation. But again, I'm still going to lean towards the default of they'll probably Bears it up in some way.
I agree. I'm completely with you there. But it is interesting that if you made the argument for any of these teams, who's the best team in the NFC North in 3 years, it really could be any of them.
Like, if you had like a high school debate class and you gave 4 people like each of the teams in the NFC North, and you have to say debate why this team has the highest ceiling, like none of the 4 people would be like, oh my God, I got stuck with it. Like, you could make a case for pretty much, I think, all 4 of them, which again, I think makes this division super intriguing. Just going over for the Packers for a moment, as you look at it from, again, a pseudo outsider's point of view, even though you are very familiar with this team in a lot of different ways. What did you A, think of the Jair Alexander situation, and then B, just the Packers offseason in general?
Well, we've talked about this quite a bit on our show, and something that we said about Jair was, for the Packers, in our minds, for them to have a truly elite defense, we thought Jair probably had to be involved there. And that would involve Jair playing as well, which, as everyone said, as Mark Murphy said, like, he doesn't play. So I totally understood the move that they made and how it fell apart. I'm happy to see him gone. I think that it only would have hurt us, really. To, like, the worst case scenario is he's great as a Viking fan, and I thought that was, it's probably unlikely, but it was on the table.
Sure.
So when I look at the Packers defense, I do think that cornerback is, it's a little, not a weak spot, but it's definitely one that if someone goes down, it could turn into one quickly. But they played a lot without him last year, right? And they did upgrade from the roster that they ended with. They did upgrade by bringing in Hobbs. So I don't think it's something to panic about if you're a Packer fan, but it's just something where it never hurts when your number 1 cornerback comes back like that. Like, you're not upset about that. So I was happy to see him go. I don't think it's detrimental to Green Bay at all, but I definitely think it's something that could have been helpful had he been good. And that's easy to, I know people are probably listening like, yeah, of course, if Jair was good, it would be helpful for the Packers. But as a Viking fan, I was glad to see him go, because I just remember him grittying over Jefferson and get this guy the hell out of here. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just, I've said the same thing though. It exactly in that phrase of like, if it were me, I probably would have moved on. And I think the Packers were right to move on. But the best case scenario to come out of it would have been he stays and he's really good, and he stays healthy. And if that would have happened, that would have clearly been the best thing that could have possibly happened to that secondary, just because he's a better cover player than anyone that they had on the roster. So again, totally understand it. Probably would have done the same thing. But if you're looking at, again, highest upside, Jair being on the team is probably that. And as a Vikings fan, you're probably not too disappointed to see the best case scenario not come to fruition, and him being a Baltimore Raven rather than a Green Bay Packer. Anything else for the Packers offseason that kind of stood out to you at all?
I thought it was one, if I were a Packer fan, obviously the Matthew Golden selection, very excited about if you're a Green Bay fan. And you saw that on draft night. it's something that they haven't done in what was it, like 25 years, right?
Right
Basically,
around 22, I think. Yeah.
which is just crazy. But also it goes to show, when you have quarterbacks as talented as they have, you can invest in other places a lot of times. And you guys, you guys had Devontae Adams, like you've had your share of good receivers too.
For
But
sure.
first round picks, that's exciting when you draft a first round receiver. It gets the fan base going, and it's something I do think the Packers need on the outside. They need someone to come in, and we throw around the word alpha a lot when we're talking about receivers, but they just need someone to come in there, I think, that can raise the bar of that offense. And Matthew Golden's looked good so far. Everything you read, and you've been there, right? He's looked good from what I've heard and seen from your postings. I thought free agency was a little disappointing. Now, again, as a sort of Packer content creator in a weird sense, I was just waiting for the news to break, whether it was like DK Metcalf or T Higgins. I know T wasn't really super realistic, but whoever it was, I was waiting for some major news to come at some point for a receiver or a defensive end. And that's where I thought, especially on that defensive side of the ball, you were kind of hoping for someone to come in there as opposed to playing running back this game of let's hope someone elevates. And that's what they decided to do. So where they spent their money with Banks and Hobbs, and a lot of people think they overpaid for those guys. I just don't know how much better the Packers got this offseason, as opposed to, like, if you really zoom out on the NFC North, the Lions are relying on guys coming back, right?
Yep.
That's what they're doing to get better. They're relying on guys coming back. The Packers are relying on guys taking a step up to get better, which is sort of where they were last year. But they have, for each team, there's some other pieces involved here, but the general principle. And the Vikings brought in a ton of guys on the offensive line and the defensive line. And the Bears are kind of a mix of everything. So it's kind of fun to look at the North as these four teams that are kind of taking different approaches to how they're going to get better. But Green Bay to me was, do you really trust these guys? And they seem to actually trust them. But I'd be a little bummed if I were a Packer fan, because you want that splash move, right?
Yeah.
You really want that. And maybe it wasn't the right move for the team. And Green Bay's so good at this where they don't overreact. And, and they're harsh with their decisions. They stand on them for better or worse. And usually it works out. So, but if I were a Packer fan, I know I'd be a little bummed out. Did you feel that way?
To some extent, yes. It did feel like, I think a lot of Packers fans wanted a ceiling raiser, and it felt like they grabbed some floor raisers, meaning that like you're putting yourself in a position to be successful, giving you more depth, giving you more competition, and making sure that like you have all the pieces that you need to be at least successful. It's going to be, I think, very difficult for this team, even with a few injuries here or there, to be bad, right? Like they're going to be a good football team and competing week in and week out. I think everyone was maybe looking for that one transaction, trade, free agent signing, whatever, that was going to be able to elevate. And then, to be fair, they got two of them this past year in Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs. So I get, and I don't know that really, when you look at it, kind of like you mentioned with the T Higgins situation, the more you looked at it, the more like all the pass rushers, a lot of the key ones got re-signed or were not really available in the first place. You could have went with a Josh Sweat. Certainly that's an opportunity that maybe was out there. Sweat got almost the identical contract that Aaron Banks got. And I think if a lot of people said, you could have Josh Sweat or Aaron Banks, which one would you rather have? They probably would have taken Josh Sweat. I think understandably so. They could have gone even more aggressive than the Patriots did with Milton Williams, but they made him the highest paid free agent in all of football.
Like an overpay.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. So I think a lot of those things didn't quite materialize in the way that maybe a lot of people were hoping they could have. Now, does that mean you should go spend $77 million on Aaron Banks or utilize the money on Nate? Those are fair questions. I'm mostly fine with it. There's nothing that excites me to a extremely high level. There's nothing that I'm disappointed with either deal. They're good, solid transactions that we see Green Bay make all the time. And I kind of trust their pro personnel department, because outside of Jimmy Graham, since Goody's been here, they've basically hit on every major free agent signing that they've done. So again, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, but there definitely is that taste of like, just wanted something a little bit more, juicy.
It felt like if they had gotten one of those guys, and I'm glad you pointed out, because Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney worked out about as well as you possibly could have imagined.
Yep.
It did feel like they were maybe that, especially we talked about edge rusher, that one guy away from really taking this defense to another level where, like, look at the end of the Eagles games, right? Against the Rams, game on the line, Jalen Carter just took over those final two plays. And you think about, I know I'm talking D tackles here, but and I'm also talking one of the best ever, but like Aaron Donald in the Super Bowl. Like you have those guys who take the moment.
Yep.
And I don't know where it is on the Packers defensive line right now that I really go, I actually believe that guy could take over a game here. Like I think the Vikings, I can see Jonathan Grenard on a particular play, like winning a game. I can see, Aiden Hutchinson for sure winning a game. I don't know if I see that along the Packer D line, but again, they've decided to go the different route of let's hope one of these guys steps up. And there's certainly a lot of candidates. You just need, I think the whole offseason for Green Bay, I've been saying it's an offseason where they need to like sort of look at themselves in the mirror and go, like, how am I gonna make myself better? And it's everyone. It's like the receivers, it's Jordan Love, it's the D line. Like if they all take that to heart and get better, it's gonna be hard to beat the Packers.
I think Green Bay's almost taken the idea of like, we don't need any one player to become an all-pro. We just need everyone to just kind of take that small step forward. And you look at the defensive line, right? Devontae Wyatt, Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, LVN. If all of them just take that small step forward or play again, how we've maybe seen like Clark and Gary play in the past, that's going to get you a huge chunk of what you need. I don't think it's going to take a Herculean effort from anybody. It's just going to take everyone just kind of doing a little bit more than what they did. But that whether that happens or not is, again, that remains to be seen. I do think DeMarcus Covington, the new defensive line coach, they're basically banking on, hey, we spent 4 first-round picks and a couple big contracts on this defensive line already. Can you make something of that? And can we bring in a new coach that unlocks that rather than trying to restart from scratch and getting new first-round picks and new high-priced free agents in there? We'll see if it works. If it works, awesome. If not, they're probably going to have to go back to the drawing board and kind of remake that defensive line next year.
Yeah, I think they're in a good spot though. The Packers, we're sort of nitpicking to a degree, right? When we go over their off season,
do on end of June, early July, right?
Yeah, like this is a really good football team, and they should be a team that come December are competing for, not like they really should compete for the division. Last year was sort of an anomaly, I think, with 15 wins for the Lions and 14 for the Vikings. And the other piece of it this year is, as you know, the schedule is brutal in the NFC North.
It is.
I think that opens the door to a lot of fun conversations and a lot of excitement at the end of the year, where Detroit's opening. Hold on, let me look real quick, Andy. The Lions' schedule, I believe, starts off pretty brutal.
Starts with Green Bay.
Yeah, well, yeah. How much harder can it get than that? So they start with the Packers and then the Bears. They host the Bears. Okay, yeah. Then it's at the Ravens, host the Browns, at the Bengals, at the Chiefs, host the Bucks, host the Vikings, at the Commanders, at the Eagles. Like that is, dude. You're at Jaden Daniels. You're at Burrow. You're at Lamar. You're at Green Bay, and you're at Mahomes and the Chiefs. Like that's all within the first 8 or 9 weeks. Like that is just vicious.
Poor Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns have no chance of winning that game. That's like the one game on the Lions schedule. We're like, all right, we got to win that one. Everything else is going to be tough.
That will be the Lions let out some frustration probably following their night game in Baltimore. Not a good day to be a Browns fan, if there is one.
Yeah, it is going to definitely be an iron sharpens iron in the NFC North, and just with the schedules that all 4 teams have. And again, I think that just makes it massively interesting as to what these teams look like, especially after, again, 3 teams make the playoffs and you go 0-3 in the playoffs this past year. There's pressure on these teams, and I think it's very exciting to see who raises to that and who ultimately wins the division. Not just that, but who can actually be successful in the playoffs from this division. Before we get you out of here, really quick, just a couple notes from the Vikings offseason that Packers fans should be aware of.
Oh, no, it's all about building up the lines, like we were saying before, shoring up the interior, which we did, shoring up the interior of the defensive line as well. I'm very excited to see how that looks, right? Because it's been so long since the Vikings have had a dominant offensive line. Like we've had pieces. Christian Darrisaw is as good as it gets. Brian O'Neill, almost as good as it gets. But that interior has been a problem for a long time. So bringing in Will Freeze, bringing in Ryan Kelly from Indianapolis, I'm very happy to finally address that area. And then, of course, Donovan Jackson, if I haven't made clear, it's future Hall of Fame track for this guy. So, and I was very excited when we took him as well.
I remember that. I remember that very clearly.
Everyone remembers. Yeah. But I was really happy with the way that they addressed the lines. Going back to what we talked about in the very beginning, if we come full circle, the one thing that concerns me is the secondary. Because it was great to bring back Byron Murphy. That had to happen. Like if that didn't happen, it's a different conversation we're having right now. But the more I look across that, Harrison Smith is getting older. Theo Jackson, like that's a familiar face, but it's a new face in terms of starting. And how much do I trust Mekhi Blackman coming back from injury? This is where I sort of start to get into this debate of, all right, is there a world where Jared Goff, Jordan Love, and Caleb Williams can rip these guys apart if the pass rush doesn't get home? And we know how good the offensive lines are. That's where I start to get a little concerned. Mekhi Blackman has assured everyone and said, no, we have a great unit, but I'm not sure if I totally believe it until I see it.
The two secondaries, Green Bay and Minnesota, I think going to be two big talking points for this division. We talked about how things could swing and go in one way or the other. We've talked about the quarterbacks. I think the secondaries are going to play a huge role. Even the secondary in Detroit, they obviously made big strides last year, but I think there's still some question marks in that one as well. Chicago might actually be the one at cornerback, at least, that like you look at it and you're like, all right, yeah, they're pretty good at corner. But and we kind of go back to the conversation of Chicago. You look at their roster, their depth chart, and you're like, they've got a lot of pieces that are really freaking good. Just can they actually put it together and be a good football team? That remains to be seen. Hopefully not for Chicago.
It's also, bouncing back to the Vikings, a lot of it's going to be the Isaiah Rodgers signing too. There's high expectations for him coming in where, all the attention was on Cooper DeJean. It was on Darius Slay, Quinion Mitchell. There's high hopes for Isaiah Rodgers coming in here. And if he's able to be what they're talking about, that changes some things. But again, there are a lot of question marks. I love Josh Metellus, but Josh Metellus is another guy who Cam Bynum had a great year. Like Josh Metellus he's also a weird player for me to watch, where he doesn't look like he should be covering receivers or tight ends, but he's just good at it. But yeah, I think overall, one other piece of the Vikings is not losing anyone on the coaching staff after a 14-3 year. I thought Brian Flores was gone, and to have him come back, I think is very important with a lot of the upgrades that they've had. So I'm very excited. It's going to be a really fun year.
I think so too. I was going to say that I think Cam Bynum's one of the most underrated players in the league, but when he gets 4 years, $60 million, it's hard for me to say he's underrated anymore. He got a big contract, but I really enjoyed him in Minnesota, and I do think he didn't always quite get the credit that he deserved in Minnesota. But he's fantastic, and we'll see what he does now in Indianapolis. But he got paid deservedly so, and I do think that's a big loss. Even if you have the pieces in Minnesota at safety and Metellus and Harrison Smith to kind of overcome it, still think that was a really good player that you guys are definitely losing.
Definitely was. It was a huge loss, but at the same time, where we spent our money and where we focused our attention, as you just said,
smarter.
It was kind of hard to bring Cam back, even though there is a degree, there's an importance too of the locker room culture and these guys. Cam Bynum was perhaps as focal to that locker room culture as anyone on the team, with all the celebrations, and you hear people talk about him. Harrison Smith's crying at the end of the year, talking about Cam Bynum. It's that was a big loss in more ways than just on the field, but winning has a way of curing all. So if the Vikings come out and JJ McCarthy's playing well, I don't think we'll be talking too much about the Cam Bynum loss by week 2 or 3.
You also got the heartbeat of the Packers locker room and Aaron Jones over there now. So he's
amazing. I had no idea. I don't know how I didn't realize this, probably because I'm a Viking fan, but Aaron Jones, the way you guys talked about him, I was like, what is he up for, sainthood or something?
He might be.
and then you see him come in, and the way the guys talk about him, O'Connell does the post game locker room speeches that the Vikings post on Twitter and Instagram, and it's just he said, this guy came in here, changed the culture from day one. Every single week, you just hear about how great Aaron Jones was in the locker room, and I am so happy they brought him back, and it's great to see an all-time Viking finish his career out here.
That is one I'm still a little bit surprised by, even if it worked out pretty well with the Josh Jacobs signing, who was also a great locker room guy in his own accord. But yeah, seeing Aaron Jones in purple and yellow is definitely not an easy one to stomach each week. That's for sure. Paul, I cannot thank you enough. You guys do a tremendous job over on the Paul Farrington Show. Tell us where we can find you on social media and anything you want to plug on the way out.
So yeah, you could find us at Farrington Show, I believe on Twitter and Instagram. That's the handles. And then on YouTube, Paul Farrington Show. We do stuff on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings over the summer. And then during the season, we also we loop in some Sunday reactions, which are really fun. That's the bread and butter of the show there. You get to see us really upset. That's where it's at. So yeah, appreciate you guys and appreciate you, Andy, for bringing me on. This was really fun.
Yeah, likewise. Hopefully, we see a lot of those angry reactions on Sundays this upcoming season. But no, it should be a really fun one, and we'll definitely have to do this again soon. Go follow him again at Farrington Show on social media, and again, the Paul Farrington Show on YouTube. That's going to do it for us today. You can find me at Andy Herman NFL, and of course, the podcast at Pack-A-Day Podcast. Until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.